Hello, it's the Educated Grunt again, here with episode 4 in my Chosin Reservoir series. I hope everyone is having a good day. And a quick note, I had some technical issues with my YouTube account, and it was shut down for a day, but I contacted YouTube and they got it all set up and scored away, so we're back in business. So with no further delay, let's get on to this. While the fighting was taking place, General Ned Almond was flying to Tokyo at General MacArthur's orders. The Corps commander had reported to General MacArthur at 2200 hours on the 28th of November 1950 and received orders to discontinue the 10th Corps attack and to withdraw and consolidate his forces for a more cohesive action against the enemy. 5 hours after this meeting, at about 0300 hours on the 29th of November 1950, Colonel Faith's executive officer, Major Crosby P. Miller, went to the frontline companies with orders from Colonel Maclean to prepare at once to join the rest of his forces 4 miles south. Because the enemy roadblock separating the two elements of the task force, Colonel Maclean ordered Faith to abandon as much equipment as necessary in order to have enough space on the trucks to haul out the wounded, and then to attack south. All wounded men, about 100 by now, were packed into trucks that formed a column on the road. Because of the necessity of maintaining blackout, it was not practical to burn the vehicles, kitchens, and other equipment before it was left behind. When the withdrawal order reached the rifle platoons, the plan for withdrawing the battalion segment by segment collapsed as the men abruptly broke contact with the Chinese Communist forces, fell back to the road, and assembled for the march. The enemy picked up fire immediately, since the movement and the abrupt end of the firing made it obvious to the Chinese that the Americans were leaving. Colonel Faith directed 2 companies to provide flank security by preceding the column along the high ground that paralleled the road on both sides for about 2 miles. Movement of the 1st Battalion column got underway an hour before dawn on the 29th of November. Because Captain Seaver, commander of Charlie Company, 1st 32nd Infantry, had been wounded in the leg the day before, he instructed one of his platoon leaders, Lieutenant James O. Mortrude, to lead the company. Slipping and stumbling on the snow-covered hills, Mortrude and the rest of the company set out along the high ground east of the road. Company B was on the opposite side. Mortrude could hear vehicles below, but could not see anything in the dark. He encountered no enemy. The column moved without opposition until the first sign of daylight. It reached the point of the road following the shoreline, turned northeast to northeast to circle a long finger of ice. The Chinese roadblock was at the end of this narrow strip, and here enemy fire halted the column. The battalion's objective, the perimeter of the rest of Maclean's task force, was just now across the strip of ice and not much further than a mile by the longer road distance. Halting the vehicle column, Colonel Faith sent 2 companies under the hill directly north of the strip of ice with orders to circle the roadblock and attack it from the east. At the same time, he told Lieutenant Campbell to set up his weapons on a hill overlooking the enemy roadblock. Carrying 2 heavy machine guns and a 75mm recoilless rifle, Campbell's group climbed the hill and commenced firing on the general roadblock area. From this hill, he and his men could see the friendly perimeter on the opposite side of the narrow strip of ice. And to the south beyond that, they could see enemy soldiers. 100 or more were standing on a ridgeline just south of the friendly force. About a dozen Chinese in formation marched south on the road. They were beyond machine gun range, but the recoilless rifle appeared to be effective on the ridgeline. Down on the road, Colonel Faith's column suddenly received fire from the vicinity of friendly units across the finger of ice. Believing that the fire was his own troops, Colonel Maclean started across the ice to make contact with them and halt the fire. He was hit 4 times by enemy fire. The men watching could see his body jerk with each impact, but he continued and reached the opposite side. There he disappeared and was never seen again. It now became evident that the fire was Chinese. Colonel Faith assembled as many men as he could and led them in a skirmish line directly across the ice. As it happened, a company-sized enemy force was preparing attack positions of the 57th Artillery Battalion when Colonel Faith's attack struck this force in the rear. Disorganized, the Chinese fell apart. Faith's men had killed about 60 Chinese and dispersed the rest. In the meantime, the two rifle companies approached the enemy force manning the roadblock. Now surrounded itself, the roadblock force also fell apart and disappeared into the hills. With the road open, the column of vehicles entered the perimeter of the friendly forces. After a search for Colonel Maclean failed to discover any traces of him, Colonel Faith assumed command of the task force and organized all remaining personnel into a task force. Thus, the 31st, 32nd, and 57th Artillery. Friendly forces also consolidated, still occupied a precarious position. During the afternoon, Faith and his commanders formed a perimeter defense of an area about 600 by 2,000 yards into which the enemy had squeezed them. This perimeter around a pocket of low, slightly sloping ground was particularly vulnerable to attack, except for this area along the reservoir. Colonel Faith's task force was surrounded by ridge lines, all of which belonged to the Chinese. They were firing positions on a couple of mounds of earth within the perimeter and along the embankments of the road, and a single-track railroad that ran through the area. Several Korean houses, all damaged, stood within the perimeter. There were many Chinese bodies on the ground, one of which wore a new American field jacket that still had its original inspection tags. Rations were almost gone. Ammunition and gasoline supplies were low. The men were numbed by the cold. Even those few who had managed to retain their bedrolls did not fall asleep for fear of freezing. The men had to move their legs and change position occasionally to keep their blood circulating. Automatic weapons had to be freed every 15 or 30 minutes to keep them in working order. Three factors prevented the situation from being completely hopeless. First, airdrops were delivered on the afternoon of the 29th of October. The first airdrop landed on the high ground to the east, and friendly forces had to fight to get it. They recovered most of the bundles and the captured Soviet Chinese who had been after the supplies. A second drop went entirely to the Chinese, landing outside the perimeter to the southwest. A third drop was successful. One airload consisted of rations, the other of ammunition. The second factor was the Marine Tactical Air Support, which constantly harassed the enemy with napalm rockets and machine gun fire. Throughout the 29th and 30th of November, the Black Corsairs hit the enemy even during the night between the 2 days, when they operated by bright moonlight. Pilots later reported that there were so many enemy personnel in the air they could not effectively drop their loads of supplies anywhere around the perimeter. The third factor was the hope that friendly forces would break through the Chinese from the south and form an effective rescue. There was talk that the assistant division commander of the 7th Division, General Hodes, even had formed a task force and was attempting to join them. This was true. Colonel Maclean had asked for help the day before on the 28th of November when he realized he was surrounded. In a message to the 10th Corps, he asked for his 2nd Battalion, then at Ham Hung, awaiting orders from Corps, to be dispatched at him at once, even if it had to fight its way north. Although the Corps failed to act promptly upon Maclean's request, it did form a task force from several small units, then located at Hudong-ni, a small lumber town about a third of the distance between Hagaru-ri and Maclean's force. Under command of General Hodes, this task force started north at mid-morning on the 28th of November, but a strong enemy force had halted it just north of the village and forced it to withdraw. The 2nd Battalion, 31st Infantry, meanwhile, awaited for orders. Late on the afternoon of the 28th, Corps ordered to set up blocking positions at Majiangdong, a third of the distance from Han Hung and Hagaru-ri. It was to move by rail with trucks following by the road. A little later, Corps changed the order. The 2nd Battalion was to move by rail to Majiangdong the next afternoon. From there, 10th Corps would furnish trucks to haul the battalion north to help Colonel Maclean. The battalion arrived at Majiangdong and spent the entire day awaiting 10th Corps trucks. None came. When the battalion's own trucks arrived as part of the initial plan for establishing a roadblock in the village, 10th Corps ordered them off the road. Because of the confusion at 10th Corps headquarters, the battalion's own trucks were not released to it, even though promised the 10th Corps trucks did not arrive. Thus, 2 entire days passed without progress in providing effective release for Colonel Maclean's surrounded battalions. It was while his 2nd Battalion waited at Majiangdong that Colonel Maclean disappeared at the enemy roadblock. Finally, on the morning of 30 November, the relief battalion got underway. before it had gone halfway to Hagaru-ri to come under enemy attack itself, and did not reach Chosin-ri until the following morning. By then, the road between Hagaru-ri and Hamhung was threatened by the enemy, and it became necessary to divert the 2nd Battalion to help to protect the entire corps withdrawal route. It was therefore held in Chosin-ri. 10 miles above Hagaru-ri, Colonel Faith's task force beat off the enemy probing attacks that harassed his force during the night of the 29th, 30th of November 1950. The Chinese concentrated on 2 points where the road entered the perimeter and on the south. They succeeded in overrunning a 75mm recoilless rifle position and capturing some of the crew. There were no determined attacks, however, and the perimeter was still intact when the dawn came. It was another cold morning on the morning of the 30th of November. The sky was clear enough to permit air support out inside the perimeter. The soldiers built fires to warm themselves, and the fires drew no enemy fire. Hopefully, the men decided they withstood the worst part of the enemy attack. Surely they thought a relief column would reach them by that day. A litter-bearing helicopter made 2 trips to the area on the 30th of November, carrying out 4 seriously wounded men. Fighter planes made a strike on high ground above task force base, and cargo planes dropped more supplies, some of which fell to the enemy. As the afternoon wore on, it became apparent that no relief column was coming that day. Colonel Faith and Major Curtis organized a group of men to serve as a counterattack force to repel any Chinese penetration that might occur during the coming night. As darkness settled for another 16-hour-long night, commanders tried to encourage the troops. Hold out one more night. We've got it made. This is the end of part 4 of my East of Chosin series. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. And if you could like, share, subscribe, and leave me a comment or a question in the box below, I'd sure appreciate it. This is the Educated Grunt signing off.